What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for coming back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. The time has finally come to wrap up my Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger saga reviews here with the last one, the remake from 2010. And I started it off with my buddy Rashad reviews. I had him come in. He's the biggest Freddy Krueger fan that I know. So I asked him to be in that first one with me, and he's done a couple of them throughout the series with me. And now it's time to wrap things up with Rashad. So we're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on the remake. So what I can say about this movie right out of the gate is that when I saw it back in the day, I wasn't crazy about it. Like, I thought it was cool, but I was very much attached to Robert Englund. I've changed a lot as a film watcher, and especially as somebody who critiques film. I try to just go into everything enjoying it for what it is, just enjoying that interpretation of whatever it is. And there are certain things that I've always felt don't need to be remade, but sometimes with horror characters like this, I can see where it can be cool. I can see where something can be done on a cinematography level, on a performance level, on a special effects level that can bring something new and different to this franchise. And similar to when I did the Friday the 13th franchise, this movie was kind of a breath of fresh air by the time I got to it. Now, you do have a New Nightmare right before it, or, you know, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, right before it. So you have a good movie right before it. And then you also have Freddy vs. Jason, which I also really enjoy. So, you know, two different kinds of good movies. One's more of a guilty pleasure versus, you know, New Nightmare actually being a good movie in my opinion. But yeah, you know, when you come out of the Friday the 13th franchise, by the time you get to the remake, it's just such a breath of fresh air. And it's nice to see this character that you've been following for all these movies done in a, you know, more modern sense as far as just filmmaking. And so similar to that, I think that this movie kind of had that same kind of vibe for me after watching a lot of really bad Freddy Krueger movies, or just not so great ones. Even though I love Robert Englund in the role, it was nice to see a movie like this that's very well shot, that has some pretty solid effects, has a little bit more of that creep factor on an overall level. But does that make it better than the original? No way. Now, I will say this is definitely better than a lot of films in this franchise. I think a lot of times people just have that direct connection to Robert Englund, like I do, and sometimes are not able to look past the fact that some of the movies he's in as Freddy Krueger, as great as he may be, yeah, some of those movies are stinkers. And this movie, for the most part, I like it. I think it's a solid entry into the franchise, but it is very much a remake. Now, when you watch the remake for Friday the 13th, I think what they did really well with that movie is they took the first three films and consolidated it to one film. The movie opens up with the end of the first film, skipping all of those events and just setting up Jason right out of the gate. And then once we actually get into the movie, it doesn't really matter who these young people are that are at Camp Crystal Lake. You know, it's mainly about the people kind of just being killed by Jason. It doesn't really matter what the names of the characters are or anything like that. So it's not a complete remake of the original. They took that first film and they kind of bring parts of it in, same with the second and the third one, where you see Jason in that film with a bag over his head, and then later on in the film he ends up getting the hockey mask, which wouldn't end up happening until the third film in the actual original Jason Voorhees franchise. So the reason I bring this all up is that was cool because it was very much its own thing. You know, it is a remake, but it takes three of the films, kind of squishes it into one. And again, you have a new situation with new characters that are at Camp Crystal Lake, you know, with the updated filmmaking tools. And so with this one, this very much has a lot of that, but is very much a remake of the original film, with scenes and shots in the film that are completely pulled from the original film. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes it's just hard to not compare. What I can say is, after having binged all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, that first one still really, I would say, is at the top for me. It's such a great film. There's been some great entries into the franchise that have definitely competed, or at least bring you something different in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise than you don't get in the first film. But with this film, it very much just feels like a copy and paste kind of thing. One thing that I just got to start off with that a lot of people don't like about this movie is that instead of Freddy just being a straight up child murderer, which isn't great, but, you know, it's a little bit more palatable, you know, I think, as a moviegoer. Whereas in this one, they make Freddy a child molester. It's very heavily implied that he is, you know, a pedophile. And yeah, so that element of it kind of just takes away from the fun part of Freddy, where it's like he's just this over the top, you know, psychotic child murdering, you know, horror icon. Whereas in this one, it's like, sure, though that's never good, it's never a good thing, you know, it's horror. But when you add in something like, you know, child molestation, it gets a little bit weird. So I have to say that's one element of this version of Freddy that I can understand why a lot of people don't like. In this film, he's played by Jackie Earle Haley, and I think he does a good job. I like his voice. I like the creepy element of him. Visually, he's not as appealing or as cool looking as Robert Englund was as the character. The look that they gave him is a lot more realistic as far as what a burn victim would more likely look like, but I don't think that he just has as much of an iconic face as Robert Englund as the character. It just is what it is, and it's hard not to compare. But I think he does a good job. Here's what I'll say. I think he does a good job in the role. He's not iconic Freddy. It's hard, again, after having watched all of those with Robert Englund, where the voice and the laugh and the lines of dialogue are so iconic. You don't have that with him here, but what I will say is I do really enjoy his performance, and I think a lot of people give him a lot more crap than he deserves for the performance. But yeah, outside of that, majority of this film is a remake. Now, there are things that are different. I'll definitely give it credit where credit is due. There's a lot about it that they definitely take in a different direction. It's not a shot-for-shot remake, which sometimes people tend to say this film is. But what I will say on an overall level, that is, you know, it is a remake. It very much is a remake with recreated sequences and scenes from the original film, which tends to happen in remakes, but it's just hard not to compare sometimes. But yeah, on an overall level, what I would say about this movie is I like it. I think it's a solid installment into the franchise, and I think after binging the whole franchise, if you ever choose to do it the way I did it, it's definitely a breath of fresh air by the time you get there, just on a filmmaking level, because some of those last ones in the original Freddy continuity are just so bad, especially the last one, Freddy's Dead. And so getting to this one, again, just a breath of fresh air. But on an overall level, what I'll say is that it just feels like a remake that was trying to recreate that same energy from the original that it just couldn't really do, in my opinion. Now, I have some more to say about it, but let's go ahead and hear what my buddy Rashad had to say about this.
Perez, what's the deal? Pickles, is everything kosher? So I guess this concludes your Nightmare on Elm Street series review. And I thank you, sir, for inviting me to review, I think it was 1, 3, Freddy's Dead, Freddy vs. Jason, and now the 2010 remake. So thank you, sir. You know I'm a big fan of Freddy Krueger, the franchise, so it was a privilege to come on here and to give my little 2 cents and to hear my little ramblings about these movies. So here we are, Nightmare on Elm Street 2010, the remake. When you first sent me the poster, I said, oh, shit. I said, damn. But listen, I came into this time differently. I said, okay, I'm gonna watch this with the open mind and not be biased. The first time I watched this film, I was so biased against Jackie Earle Haley playing Freddy. So before I even watched the movie, I hated it. So I never gave the movie a fair chance, and I just as the movie was playing, I said, I don't like it. I don't like it. I didn't get it. I didn't give it a chance to show what it could possibly do. So I said, this time I'm going to put Robert Englund out my head. I'm going to put my love of the franchise out my head. I'm just going to watch this with an open mind. And I'm going to say I did not hate the movie. I didn't. I was ready to shit on it, but I can't hate the movie. From a technical standpoint, this movie is very good. All right, so the biggest compliment I can give is the cinematographer, the lighting. There was some creepy imagery. There was some really cool shots. And from a technical standpoint, this was a gorgeous movie to look at. And that's where my compliment kind of ends, all right? It's a remake of the original movie, so forgive me if I'm constantly comparing this one to the original, because it is a remake of it, but it's just a bland, dull remake of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. All right. Oh, okay, I'll give you a prime example. The Tina death in the first movie, iconic. That's probably one of the most illest deaths ever in a horror movie. They recreate that in this one, but with none of the imagination, none of the creativity, none of the suspense that led up to Tina's death. It just, okay, it had her on the roof, flying around, one slice, done. That was it. Where in the original, you see her being tortured. You see Freddy torturing her and laughing about the way he was torturing her, and it just made it a more disturbing scene to watch. So that's a good example. And Nancy, yes, I don't know if it's the same. I looked at the last name. I think, yeah, in the original it was Nancy Thompson. This one she had a different last name, but it was still Nancy. She had the personality of a wet mop. She was terrible. The actress that played Nancy was terrible in this movie. Like, the parts where she's supposed to scream and be frantic, oh my God, it's Freddy. It's Freddy. When somebody died, oh, Jesse's dead. So, how's your night going? She just had shit. All right, she was terrible. I couldn't stand her. I wanted her to die the most. But speaking of disturbing, they took Freddy's origin from being a child murderer, which is still very bad, but they took him from being a child murderer to a child molester. And just even saying that just sounds horrible. Why would they do that? Freddy Krueger is iconic on the level of Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger. These are villains that you love to hate, you know what I'm saying? But I love Freddy Krueger as a villain, but when you put that on him, you can't say, well, yeah, Freddy's my boy. No, Freddy can't be my boy because he fucked with kids, man. I mean, yeah, you can say, well, Rashad, he did murder him. And like I said, that's bad also, but just that, I don't even like saying the fucking word. All right? Nah, they should just left it a child murderer. Even Wes Craven had enough sense to say, all right, I'm not going to go there. Let's just make him, he killed kids, all right? You know, like throughout history with these horror stories, you know, Hansel and Gretel and shit like that, okay, kids get killed. You know, we can deal with that. But child, no. And yet another attempt to make Freddy Krueger scary is almost like the WWF and its downfall. Once the veil has been lifted and people don't take it seriously, you can't get it back. All right, Freddy will never be scary again. What they accomplished with the first 3 films, that's it. After that, they made him kind of a joke. And when you do attempt to make him scary again, it just doesn't work. Like, you know, nobody cares anymore. Jackie Earle Haley was not terrible in the movie. It's impossible shoes to fill. You're talking about Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. You're never going to top that, man. You know, I feel like he did the best that he could do. And I feel like he did put in a good performance. But Freddy is, I mean, Robert Englund is Freddy. Freddy is Robert Englund. There's no way you can duplicate that. There's just no way. So it did throw me off seeing him in the role. He did the best that he could, but it just wasn't happening to me. Overall, the movie was just a little bit below average. So with that, I'm going to give 2010's A Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm going to give it a C-. I'm going to give it a fair grade. This time watching it, I actually enjoyed it more, but there were times where I was getting bored. It was starting to drag a little bit. But like I said, because technically, visually, this was a good movie. But the storytelling, the scares, the kills, it was uninspired. You know what I mean? So yeah, just a little bit below average. C- is what I give it. And there we go. Nightmare on Elm Street's done with. So Perez, the floor is yours, man. Thank you once again for having me in your Elm Street series review, man. Appreciate it. So yeah, what you got, bro?
A big thanks to Rashad G Reviews for being here in this video. Love hearing your thoughts as usual, man. And I'm glad to hear that you didn't hate this movie rewatching it, you know, because I know when we've talked about it before, you've never really been the biggest fan, but I love hearing that you were able to kind of watch it this time with open eyes and appreciate a lot about it, that you also, just like me, thought it was a lot more visually appealing than a lot of the other films in the franchise. But yeah, I can definitely agree with certain things that you said, and the most notable one for me has to be Rooney Mara as Nancy. Nancy is the main character of the original film. She'd go on to show up in the 3rd film where she ends up dying, and Heather Langenkamp, the original actress, would come back to play her, or play herself in a way, but also kind of have to play Nancy in a way as well, in a very meta film in the franchise called New Nightmare. And so yeah, Nancy definitely has ties to the franchise, and with this iteration of Nancy, they kind of went with a little bit more of like the gloomy, kind of brooding, like high school student version of the character. You know, she has some trauma in her past. She's not necessarily like as likable as the original Nancy. They went with a very different approach to the character. And because of that, Rooney Mara is playing it very bland a lot of times. The character doesn't have as much charisma and isn't really somebody that you're rooting for nearly as much as in the original film. There's a lot of scenes in this film that are pretty slow, and it kind of comes from Rooney Mara's performance. And what I can tell you right out of the gate is that I really enjoy Rooney Mara as an actress. She's given great performances. A film that I'm going to be reviewing here on this channel at some point very soon is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the David Fincher remake from like the late 2000s or early 2010s. And yeah, what I really enjoy about her performance in that film is that when she does do the elements that she's kind of putting into this film, in that film, it works for the film. Whereas for this one, sometimes it doesn't work for me, and it kind of leaves it feeling a little bit bland, especially since Nancy's such a big character. You also have Cassidy playing the character of Chris, who is essentially the version of Tina in this movie. In the original movie, at the beginning, you kind of think Tina is going to be the main character, and then she ends up being killed in her sleep. There's that iconic scene of her being ripped across the ceiling and across the walls by Freddy, and then she ends up getting her torso all ripped up from Freddy. And yeah, it's a really iconic and very creepy scene in that original film that really works, especially for the time that it came out in. And with this film, they have the character of Chris, who is the version of Tina, and it's Cassidy, who I know probably best from her work on the Arrowverse, specifically on Arrow on the CW. And what I could say about her performance is it's fine. I like her. She's a good actress, you know, but she's kind of playing the generic teenage role here. But yeah, she's essentially like the Tina of the original film and ends up dying in the exact same way, where you kind of think she's the main lead of the film for a little bit, and then not too long into the film, she ends up dying, similar to how Tina died, where she's kind of thrown across. This one is a lot more, I would say, abrupt, whereas in the other one, it was, you know, they were working with the effects that they had, but it just kind of works for that film. It's definitely eerie and creepy, and it just doesn't feel right. Whereas in this one, it's like Freddy is like throwing her around and slamming her on the wall. So what I will say is they both have their own identity, and they have a different level of intensity and creep factor. This one's definitely a lot more brutal, I would say, in the way that she's being thrown around and just smashing up against the wall. And then, you know, the effects are definitely better. Like, there's just no way getting around it. It's been a long time since that first one, and they were really able to kind of up the effects. Does it work on the same creep factor? I'd say yes and no. It depends on you as the viewer and the way that you're going into it. I really enjoy the way that they handle it in the original, but I do like the way they handle it here. So yeah, there's stuff like that where they change the name of somebody just slightly, where in this case it's Chris, who was originally Tina, but they essentially played the same role in the story. But yeah, this movie on an overall does have enough different to kind of make it stand on its own. It is very much a remake, but on an overall level, I enjoy it. I think there are some things about it that are a little bit more bland and not as memorable as the original. I can totally understand why Jackie Earle Haley ended up getting a lot of shit for playing Freddy, but I think he gives a really solid, believable performance. The look on him is a lot more realistic than what Freddy is in those original films. And on an overall level, I think it's a good fun watch, especially if you've just binged the whole franchise and you're now just getting to the remake. It's definitely a breath of fresh air after some real stinkers in the franchise. So yeah, guys, that's going to be my thoughts on A Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake from 2010. As usual, a big thanks to Rashad for being here in this video. You can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love and let him know I sent you. If you guys missed out on any of my Nightmare on Elm Street reviews, you guys can find the playlist on my channel, just simply titled A Nightmare on Elm Street. I believe I put in parentheses Freddy Krueger, just so you guys know who that is all about. And yeah, a big thanks to you guys again. Make sure you guys leave those comments down below. I hope you guys have enjoyed this series of videos. I hope maybe one day we do get another Freddy Krueger movie of some sort. We don't necessarily need it, but I think it would be pretty cool. I'm probably going to miss Freddy after having binged all these movies just now, but it'll be nice to revisit these movies at some point down the line. So again, a big thanks to Rashad, a big thanks to you guys. Like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.